All right. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me. We will go ahead and get started. Welcome to the Trusted Execution Environment and Provisioning session in the IETF 109. We have a full hour. And Dido, you are with me?
Can you hear me?
Okay. Yes, now I can hear you. Great. Okay, so we've got both chairs here, and we've got a full agenda for today since we only have 1 hour. This is an normal IETF session, so the note will apply. Most of you are familiar with it. For the agenda, and again, I want to thank Alessandro, Akira, and Sukasa for being the note takers, and I encourage the rest of you to also look at the Code EMD, which is where the notes are being taken. So this is the agenda that we have today. This is only a 1 hour session, so hopefully we have enough time to get through all of this. And Dave, I didn't have time and I forgot to send out the RATS session cancellation, but if we need to, we can set up another interim, perhaps not this week, but in a few weeks, we can do a doodle poll to further the work. So with that, any comments on the agenda? No comments. Okay, so let me switch over to the architecture and turn it over to Dave.
Okay, great. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, and it takes me a minute because I'm not fully awake.
This one is going to run a little bit longer than 5 minutes, but since we're 2 minutes ahead, I'm going to take at least 7 minutes. So.
Okay. How come I'm not seeing?
Well,
I'm trying to share your slides, and I'm not seeing them here.
as it's being started.
Are you sharing them, or you want me to share?
I was assuming you can share them. I do have them on my machine, but.
Yep. No, for some reason the Chrome tab wasn't working.
Okay, well, you tell me if you need me to, but okay, there we go. Now we see it. All right.
Yep.
Next slide. All right, so the architecture document has been through last call. As a reminder, at 108, we said there was 2 action items, moving some text and adding an unneeded TAs. And then we talked about in the minutes, right, what was an appropriate milestone. So next slide. So since IETF 108, we did those 2 action items, except for one thing. The second action item, which was adding the unneeded TAs text, we revisited. So a little over a month ago, October 16th, I posted the list, the question that was raised that had to do with, do we really want to add unneeded TAs to the list of things that are requested for RADS claims? So this is the diagram that appears in the architecture document and has for a really long time. And you can see there's stuff that goes from the TE, or the Teep agent, off to the TAM, and then potentially the TAM on the back end uses a verifier to process the evidence, and the TAM is just passing that through. And so the observation is that the claims, meaning the things that you ask for from RATS, are things that go all the way to the verifier and are important to the verifier. Whereas, what goes in, say, the Teep protocol messages that carry the evidence, well, things that the TAM cares about, but the verifier doesn't really. And so the question is, or the point was, well, this notion of requested TAs and unneeded TAs, they're not really needed by the verifier, they're for use by the TAM. And so the point was raised that says, actually putting him in the RATS claims is probably the wrong place because the verifier doesn't care, the TAM does. And so the proposal was just put them in the Teep protocol messages, not put them in the evidence because the verifier doesn't care. There was no objections raised, and so that was done. And you'll see that that affects the transport spec too. And so now this principle that claims are used for things that are important to the verifier, protocol fields are used for things that's important just to the tab. That's the principle that we try to use throughout now. And so that one was done since IETF 108, but wasn't discussed before other than on the list. So next slide. Again, unless people have objections or questions, I'm going to keep going in the interest of time. All right, so there was this open question about that Tiru had asked about clarifying the use of symmetric keys. Tiru raised it. The change is shown on the screen. Don't need to discuss unless somebody wants to, because Tiru, who filed the issue, said it looks good and closed the issue. So next slide, unless somebody has something they want to discuss. But I put the text on the slide so people can stop me if they want. And I'm trying to go fast because we're going to be pressed for time. Yeah, please, next slide, slide 5. Similarly, we had a solicitor review from Russ Housley. Most of his comments, or I should say, maybe half of a little bit more of his comments were addressed prior to 108. Some were not, and so this is the leftover ones, the remaining comments from Russ. You can see the paragraphs that we did. The chairs verified and closed the issue, so we believe that this one is also done. But you can see the text there in case somebody wants to discuss it. I think we can just go on. All right. This one was another one that was another list post from last month. And the issue here, again, was raised since IETF 108. And the issue was as follows. The term TA in the document was defined as an app that, quote, runs in a TEE, where runs means to humans that there's code there and it's not just a piece of data. Okay. Now, we already have text, or had text in the architecture document, still there, that allowed for the Teep protocol to be used to also install, quote, personalization data, where that personalization data was required by, but not bundled with the code, right? So you use the Teep protocol to install the code, and separately use the Teep protocol to install, the data configuration blob that it needs. But other text in the document only ever talked about installing, quote, TAs, right? Which implied that it could not be used to install things that are just the data blobs, and so hence the contradiction that was purely editorial. Now, to resolve this, there was already a sentence in the document that used lowercase trusted components in a way that could clearly be read to mean either a TA or personalization data. So the resolution was we just capitalized that, stuck it in the terminology section to say, whenever we mean either code or data only, we just use trusted components. And so this proposal was raised on the list a month ago. There was no objection. So right before the draft deadline, we just did it, and it's same in the other specs too. Next. I'm keeping an eye on the queue, so I don't see anybody, so just keep going. All right, so last week we had the hackathon, which Akira is going to talk about later. But one of the issues that we found during hackathon was this one that affects the architecture document. Okay, if you remember at IETF 108, we had this discussion about a way to tell the TAM that you don't need a TA anymore, so that the TAM can then choose to delete it if it wants to, right? It's just a hint, right? Because the TAM is authoritative. The problem that we found was that although we'd added a way to communicate it in the protocol, right, from the Teep agent, we never said how the Teep agent actually gets that information to put into the protocol, okay? So if you say, well, what about the request TA? How does it find the requested TAs? And the answer was we had this conceptual abstract API called request TA, but there was no symmetric unrequest TA. And so you had half of the story in the abstract API, but not the other half, and there was this gap that we found during trying to implement it. And so the fix was to add unrequest TA next to request TA using almost identical language except for saying uninstalled. Okay. And again, that issue again affects all three documents. But again, this was not in the posted document yet because it was only found during the hackathon last week. Okay. But there's already, you can see there's a pull request there. So there's already proposed text, which is on the screen. And so the belief is, unless there's objections, that we would merge the PR, right? There's no text to be written unless you don't like the text. So next slide, unless there's questions. We got lots of issues in the Teep protocol to discuss. And so I'm trying to go through the things because most of these are editorial only. If you remember, we had a discussion before about removing text that talked about security domains out of the architecture document, right? Not that it's disallowed, because you might be able to use a suit manifest to do things with security domains, but we removed it from the architecture document. However, when we removed that text, the following paragraph that's in red was left in there, which we missed because it doesn't use the word security domain. But it's talking about a problem that security domains solve. And it's under the heading, the Teep protocol addresses it. Well, that's not addressed by the Teep protocol, it's addressed by the suit manifest. And so the editorial fix is delete that paragraph to say, now we've really deleted all the text that talks specifically about security domains in the Teep protocol. And again, this was per request, not in the posted one. I see Brendan in queue, so I will stop here. Go ahead.
The Teep protocol does actually address this by its inclusion of the suit manifest. And I realize that's a small niggle, but it strikes me that it still does.
So are you proposing to not delete it? Because there's nothing in the architecture document that says how this problem is addressed.
I'm not saying that it needs to be deleted. I'm just saying that if there's a good reason to keep it, then I think it's still reasonable to assert that the Teep protocol does address the problem.
Mm-hmm. My personal opinion is that having the paragraph there begs questions that are not answered, and so it's a confusing thing. I would put it into whatever the document is that would say in the suit manifest, here's how to do security domains, which is not the architecture document.
That seems reasonable to me.
Okay. All right, I was trying to figure out if you have an objection to removing it. I would say maybe moving this paragraph to a different document, which we don't have a document that talks about security domains in the suit manifest yet, but that's where it would go in my opinion. So, all right. You're still listed as being shown in queue, Brennan, so I don't know if I'm going to keep going.
I can remove them.
Okay, great. All right, so I'm going to try to finish this one up here. So the last one is something that has not been discussed in the list yet, and so you can see there's a question mark in the issue label here. And so let me summarize this one by saying this is a question that I raised and filed an issue on, so that the working group can decide whether we want to do anything. Right? We could choose to do nothing. Okay. And so the observation is that the Teep protocol won't be used for everything. Okay. 3 reasons for that. Number one, for SIM chips, which have a TEE and a EUICC SIM chip, is already in wide use by mobile operators, and they're not using the Teep protocol, they're using the GSMA protocol. And if you look at their architecture document, it has diagrams that look just like the Teep ones, just with different labels. Number 2, global platform already standardized OTRP, which we didn't. They are now into the second version of it, meaning the second, 1.1 instead of v1.0. And so for secure elements, global platforms are already using OTRP. Third point, if we go back like at least 2 years ago, David Wheeler gave a presentation about, when we were doing OTRP, about why a bunch of stuff doesn't make sense for SGX, because there's no such thing as enumerating TAs in SGX, what does really install mean, and so on. And so classic use, and by classic I mean the uses that David Wheeler had in his presentation, one might assume that you don't need to use the Teep protocol, because what would it do? And this came up also when we were trying to implement it. And so there's a proposal that says we could explain what Teep is applicable for. And it could be applicable to things in SGX. There was a presentation I gave on behalf of Mike Purcell about the NARCS project about a year ago, when we were talking about which direction the transport protocol does. And so we said the Teep protocol is actually a use for that one, but transport is the other direction. So last slide, go on to the next one, which is just showing some proposed text in the pull request, should we choose to do something. This was what we might say if we were to say something. And so in the introduction section, it's applicable to TEEs that can install and enumerate TEEs in a TEE secured location where another domain-specific protocol standard that meets the needs is not already in use. That's an example of something we might say. Okay. The SGX section and the trust zone section, we have sections on both of those, which kind of imply when you read them that Teep protocol is applicable. And so all that text there is fine, but we might augment it with a paragraph like these that say, in which cases it might actually be applicable to SGX. And this is using the NARCS model without ever using the word NARCS here. And similarly for trust zone, where there's multiple TA stores, such as an opt-T, then anything where you can install stuff in a trusted location, it's applicable for. So that's an example of what we might say if we choose to say something. I would prefer to say something, but it's a question that I have for the working group, and I see Hank in queue, and this is my last slide. So Hank, over to you.
Hi, this is Dave. Hi, it's only on morning. It's the day, sorry.
Hi, Dave, this is
Hank. Yeah, thank you, Dave, for rescuing me. What I was trying to ask is, you said applicability. I think that's a good point. So I've been a little bit absent last time in the Teep WG meetings, and now I'm wondering what's the key difference between GSMs and GPs Teep flavors that already are there. What's this solution bringing to the table? Is that a applicability content that should also be highlighted somewhere?
I've looked at the GSMA spec, I've looked at the OTRP spec. My belief is that they are roughly accomplishing the same goals, but GSMA and OTRP respectively are for very domain-specific purposes. Like OTRP has lots of security domain stuff built in, and GSMA stuff has stuff that's very specific to mobile operators and SINs and stuff. But at a high level, they do the same thing. And so my belief is GSMA already has a deployed protocol. There's no incentive for them to switch. Like, at least right now, there's not. Similarly, Global Platform has a protocol. There's no incentive for them to switch, right? But if you're designing something for SGX or Trust Zone and you're in these other use cases, there's incentives. And so I don't know of a reason to switch, but they are a lot alike in terms of, like I said, if you look at the protocol, the architecture diagram, you can just change the labels. It's the same as our diagram.
Yeah, okay,
maybe they got some extra stuff for their use case, but.
Okay, maybe put it the other way around. So why? So this might be sounds harsh. It's not intended to be harsh. So why did we create Teep if we could have just tweaked existing protocols?
The other protocols, okay, that one I do know because I was a chair at the time and part of the BOF stuff. The other ones are not applicable outside their domain, right? And so OTRP, you can't really use it outside things that don't have security domains, and it's in a organization that's less open than the IETF. And so we said, if you wanted to do extensions to make it be applicable to other things, where would be the right place to do it? And we said IETF.
Okay, excellent. So it's like the abstracted, generalized version of flavors that exist. Okay, thanks.
Exactly.
So that is probably captured somewhere prominently at the beginning. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
I see. Hannes is in queue.
Yeah. I just wanted to add. This is Hannes here. Like, there's obviously a long history with OTRP and why we had chosen to design Teep in the way it is currently designed. And I don't think that history needs to go into the document because it's obviously like the dirty laundry of standards work between different organizations and how things can go sideways in some sense. One of the reasons why OTRP and Teep now look different is, and I think this is quite important, is that we made use of EAT and the RATS work as well as the suit work, which I believe, and that's what, if you look at the content of the OTRP protocol, that's what most of it talks about. And so we managed to sort of generalize this and put it into separate buckets. And I think that solution is like technically much better. It would be worthwhile to describe those differences, but that would obviously be much longer.
Well, I'm going to propose, since this one wasn't posted to the list, we defer this discussion to the list because we've got a bunch of other stuff to discuss. And so I would propose the chairs call time and we move on to the next presentation. Not that this isn't important to discuss.
Okay.
Just take it to the list.
Yeah. Okay, I can do the next one in 2 minutes, which is the transport spec.
You're on.
Okay, next. Minutes say from IETF 108 said we're going to publish as soon as 2 things are done. Moving text and doing redirects. Next slide. Both of those were done. As well as during the meeting, Ben Kaduk raised some questions about text referring to 2818. We just copied a sentence from an existing RFC that doesn't reference 2018, so we match kind of what's already gone through IESG. There was a discussion at 108 around headers. So we removed cache control as Hannes had proposed. And there was one fix that when I followed up with Mark Nottingham, he said unsupported media type should be 415, not 406. So we corrected that in the text. Next slide. I only got one more slide, so. Please go to slide 4. Okay, there we go. Only one new issue was raised, which is that issue that we've already discussed in the architecture document. And so we made similar changes here. And there's the open pull request on the unneeded TA that would affect this doc too. Again, similarly, if we accept it on the architecture, we accept it here. So that's it. Nothing new to discuss here that we didn't discuss during architecture or already at 108. So done.
Cool. All right. Okay,
I'm gonna get
so
I think Akira's next.
yes. Akira? I think your audio should be working now.
Akira, you need to push this microphone button. Otherwise, just joining a queue doesn't do the job.
We still can't hear you, Akira. Well, Dave, it's a good thing you went fast. I figure it's going to take him another minute. Yeah, it's interesting, Ben. Oh, well, it may be my audio that it's showing. Because Akira is not on anymore.
So if you
we
look
lost
at
him. So
the list, people who are engaged to be sending audio will have like a greenish background, and the microphone logo will be blue in the green participant list. And so at the time, Akira was in that state with the blue microphone icon. And now I see him there in that state.
hey, Akira, we can still hear you. Hello.
Is that Akira or?
No audio from Akira.
Okay, so let's.
Maybe we should switch to the other draft and then wait again.
Yeah. So, Dave, why don't you do the protocol? I know we wanted to get some of the feedback from the hackathon, but while Akira gets his audio issues resolved.
Happy to see Akira if he gets audio working. But sure, rather than having, and we're just waiting, let's go ahead and start.
Yeah,
some of these
you have
Akira. All right, should we go ahead?
Yes, go ahead.
All right, go ahead. Next slide. Okay. All right. So there's a number of issues. There's 3 collectively that I'll talk about here that are introduced on the curious slides. And so today, every Teep message has a token. The token is an unsigned integer that the TAM sends that the agent echoes back in the response. So this does require the TAM to create state to store the token, even for a query request. Now, a query request, other than the token, is identical to when it's sent to every client. The only thing that differs in query request is the token field. Okay, so that means that you have to keep state, and there's no other reason in the query request to keep state. The query response at least allows you to, or requires you to, depending on how you implement it, includes the attestation evidence. The attestation evidence already has a separate challenge field that's in the query request that's echoed back in the attestation evidence. Okay, so if you think about, well, how do I do replay protection? I need tokens for that to ensure, you know, freshness and so on. Well, you've already got the challenge field for that. Okay? There's multiple layers of stuff going on, right? There's the TLS layer, which might terminate outside the TEE, so you can't trust that. There's the COSE header. There's fields in the Teep message, like token, and then there's things inside the evidence. And so since replay protection with evidence is already done by the challenge, as long as you're using the challenge and the EAT or evidence, then you don't need the nonce for purposes of matching or replay protection, because you can already get that out of the challenge. Okay, so if you do a token, then this introduces this complex question I ran into with the implementation. It says, so when do you clean up state, right? So let's say you send the query request and you never get a query response, right? You actually have to clean up state according to some implementation defined thing. And so there's some complexity to deal with that. Okay, but does it actually buy you anything in the query request and response? So the first question is, could we just get rid of the token in the query request and the query response? Okay, now hold on that question for a second here. Let's go on to the next slide. It says, does the token actually buy you anything? Because out of the hackathon implementers, none of us could come up with an idea of why you needed a token in the query request and query response, given that you had the challenge that's echoed back in the RATS evidence. So then you say, well, is a token needed for install and delete, right? Because you got to know which install you're sending the success to, or which delete you're sending the error to. Well, and this is where I wanted Brendan to be part of this discussion here. Because again, there's multiple layers of stuff here. And today, in the latest draft that we have, the success and error message can include suit reports. The suit reports have the results of the install and the delete. Okay, and so in the suit report, and this is echoing stuff out of Brendan's suit report draft, there's a manifest digest. That one is what identifies which suit manifest was being installed or uninstalled that might have the success of the errors. And the suit record has, you know, an array of 0 or more suit records that have, you know, success or failure results or status points or whatever it is, right? So you can already say, without anything, you can always say exactly what matches, right? Because you can use a suit digest to match with the suit manifest information and the install or the delete. So my claim is, I don't know that you actually need a token for matching purposes in the install or delete either, because we have the suit manifest digest and things. So you can ask, well, what about replay protection? Well, how do you know that the suit reports that you're getting aren't replayed by, you know, the RE or something from things that were suit reports from, you know, last week, 5 months ago, or something like that? How do you know that the suit reports are fresh? Okay, and so again, maybe you solve that at the COSE layer, maybe you solve it in the suit report itself, but I don't know that you need to solve it in the Teep message. And so the proposal too is, could we use either the COSE header or the suit reports and not use the token and install or delete either? And so let me open it up here because I see Connors is already in queue.
So the token, which is a nonce that is initially sent by the DAM and then relayed back in the response, you said like you could also use the nonce for that purpose, but it's not it's not necessarily the case that the nonce is always used when the dam doesn't need attestation information, then it wouldn't use the nonce. And
Yep.
so
Is
you
there
have
any
the token
such
is a way
case?
to.
And so I think two things we talked about during the hackathon. One is there any such case where you would not want to include the evidence? And number two, if there is, could you just have the token be optional and only used in such a case? And number three,
Okay.
Are you actually buying anything given that the query requests are identical? Can you and this goes back, Hannes, to that question about can you accept unsolicited query responses?
Yeah. So for me, like the reason why there was the need to associate the response to a request was we said in the architecture document that we may have actually multiple DEs on a single device, and if the DAM issues multiple requests, it needs to know how to match one request to the other. I think that's where it came from initially.
But if it comes, if you need to know which TE it is, you'd kind of want the evidence for that case, because the evidence should have the TE identifiers, which I see Hank is in queue because that was discussed in RAS.
I'll let Hank. Yeah.
Well, and I see Brendan's up first, so.
When I wrote this, I had assumed that there was going to be a replay protection layer underneath the suit report, but I don't see a problem with including it. And I think pretty much anywhere that it's used, a replay protection is probably going to be a question. So it probably needs some kind of counter in there, but I suspect it needs to be very loosely defined because the content of whatever token, if you will, the suit report contains is probably highly application dependent.
Yeah, you can see my bullet there probably applies to suit reports in general. So when we have this discussion, the suit working group later this week, we might want to have this issue in suit because this is probably not Teep specific, right? Suit reports in general, Teep is just one of the ways to convey it. I think it's actually a more general question.
Yeah, indeed. I agree with you on that.
Okay.
So hi, this is Hank. So I heard the term evidence, so then my attention was sparked, of course. So my assumption is that the request does not include a EAT, but the reply will substitute the nonce for the EAT, or are you expecting the TEM to issue a EAT on the request also? I didn't see
the request. The request can include a challenge, which you can interpret as being nonce, but it could be something more than a nonce. Just depends on what the mechanism is. So when I say challenge, you can hear that as saying, "Oh, he said nonce," right? So the request has a challenge. The response includes the evidence as long as the TAM requested it, and so the challenge is used in computing the evidence. So and the evidence is by default an EAT. Yes.
Okay, so you basically would not return the challenge content, but the challenge content is then nested in the evidence, and that would be so not to set it with the okay, I see.
Yeah.
Okay,
so in your reference interaction model, right, you have a nonce generated by the verifier, and so that's the challenge, and then the nonce is then included inside the EAT to give freshness, and that's what is done here.
Okay, but that by extension also adds as the included nonce, so to speak, for the TAM, for the response to the TAM. So it's like the double layered nonce, so to speak. Okay, that is fine. I think that's a good idea. I just want to have a small comment here, clarifying comment on the reports. So the suit report was created with evidence and attestation results in mind, so it's ease of computability. So it's relatively highly refined evidence claims here that could be used probably even in metrics for attestation results relatively easy without a complicated policy.
Okay, so I think so far what I'm hearing, just to summarize the last three speakers put together, is just that there might still be a case for a token, but maybe it's not required, maybe it's optional. And I think Akira has in his deck a slide that shows the different units and things. That was one of the proposals. And so I'll let Akira cover that option in his slides. But But otherwise, I think we actually depend on the resolution to the suit discussion to resolve this one for sure.
Yeah, I'm okay with having it optional in the response, but I believe we need to have a replay protection mechanism in there. Sort of not the replay, but the liveness guarantee, because when we create the signature over the message, over the response message, there has to be something that proves that it has been created recently, and that should be untangled from the EAT liveness check, which you talked about. I'm happy to do a formal analysis to make sure that the protocol is fine.
Sounds good. Thank you for volunteering. Okay. Any other questions on this one, Hank or Brendan? You have follow-ups? Go ahead.
Yeah. So there was a comment that you made about the about using it for attestation. Hank, specifically, you made that comment. I did look through that, and I discussed that with Dave, and I think the conclusion that we came to was that using it for attestation might be possible, but that it's probably more complex than is necessarily useful for attestation purposes as a general case.
Okay, so I would propose that we have that follow-up discussion in the suit working group rather than here, because we have other issues to talk about. So, if everybody's fine with that, I'd like to go to the next slide. But Hank, you're still in queue. So, any last thing to say? Okay, let's go on.
I just asked him if, yeah. So okay. Time check.
Yep.
Akira
you tell me what.
Akira said he didn't need the full 15 minutes. So if we gave him 10 minutes.
Okay, that's fine. So we'll go for another
13 minutes. Yep.
13. Okay, thank you. Just cut me off because I believe that we have more slides than we'll get through. So we'll get through as many as we can and then we'll stop. So, all right. So this one, again, there's two issues that have to do with cipher suites. Okay. So what the draft does right now is it defines two cipher suite values. You can see there, kind of defines like an IANA registry, and there's two values out of there defined right now. In the messages, you can see the supported cipher suites is an array of suite values. And so that's what the TAM sends. And then the agent sends back a selected one, which is a single one. And then in the combined CDDL, you see this cipher suites as bitmaps. Okay. Well, you've got this array of suite values. That looks like a typo. So that's what 72 is why does that say as bitmaps? We think that you just say cipher suites and delete those two words. So that's issue 72. 73, which I think is just trivial editorial. So 73, on the other hand, is you've got two different values defined, right? If your TAM only supports value 1, your agent only supports value 2, or vice versa, you don't have interoperability. So the question is, what cipher suite or suites are mandatory to implement on each end? That's what 73 is. I don't know what the recommendation is there, but I would defer to any crypto people here if they have a recommendation for what should be mandatory to implement. I'm looking for somebody just hand me the answer because I don't know enough to know what should be mandatory here. So I don't know if Ben or somebody, if you have a recommendation.
So jumping in, this is Ben Kaduk. We tend to prefer the X25519 and DSA for sort of de novo deployments where you don't have any legacy considerations to work with. But we tend to have to fall back to P256 and ES256 for cases where you have like a TPM or a smart card that can only do the older algorithms.
So I'm interpreting that as saying you kind of have to support 2 for legacy purposes, but you want to move to number 1. And so maybe number 2 is mandatory and number 1 is encouraged and will become mandatory in the future. Is that how you'd phrase it, or?
That, I think, could be the case. I don't have a great picture myself of what the deployed hardware it currently is.
So what if we said that both of them are mandatory on the TAM and the agent can choose either one of them? That would be another approach. Right, so you can, I mean, there's multiple ways to get interoperability, right? You can either pick one and say both ends have to do that one and could choose to negotiate something else, or you can say that one end has to do all of the set and the other end can choose which one it wants. And so if you think about Teep agents that are in constrained devices, then maybe mandating two, or you want the one that's best for a small IoT device or something like that. So we could take an approach that says TAMs must support both and Teep agents can pick either one of those two. Ming, I see you're in queue. Sorry, Ben, did you have anything there before going to Ming?
Yes, just real quick, make the TAM support both of them is perhaps the more forward-looking option. I want to hear what Ming says as well.
Okay.
Yeah,
Ming?
so just FYI, Russ put on the chat that he has a minor preference for two, for the same reason Ben stated.
Yep. Okay. I see a couple +1s for both on TAM and okay.
Right.
Ming?
Yeah, I can speak. Okay. So I just want to comment on what you said there was, in an old protocol, we already have, say, TAM supported, mandatory supported both, and agent support one for them. So I will support that position. So that has been a case where the agent don't need to support all. I just want to put comment on that.
Okay, sounds like we actually have, I don't hear anybody arguing for something else. So as an author, I will accept that as being direction of the authors. So next slide.
I just want to make sure Tidu captures that on the notes too.
Yeah. Okay, so here there was this thread that was joint Rats and Teep with the title "Each Claims Needed by Teep." Right. This one is still open, where the architecture document says, here's some things you have to be able to express in claims somehow, and doesn't say how. That leaves it to, you know, something it's a normative spec, you know, a protocol spec or something to say. So we have to be able to say it, right? And so if you go down that list, that thread enumerates a couple of the requirements, and some of them have claims that are already there. And Lawrence had responded saying, yep, we need a new claim. Yep, we need a new claim. And in Rats yesterday or whatever, Lawrence mentioned that they're still working on that. They have pull requests and stuff in progress. And so because of that, my summary is that that the proposal, at least I think from Lawrence and myself, is that we should not define yet, and let till proven otherwise, any Teep-specific claims, right? Lawrence's belief, and I agree, is that everything in this list is things that would be applicable outside of Teep, and so would go into the EAT spec or something in the Rats working group, and we can just refer to it. And so some of them are there now, some of them are not. And in Rats, Lawrence mentioned that for firmware and software identifiers, right, he says the intent for software claims is to use Coswood, and this was on a slide in the Rats working group. But there's nothing in the EAT document about Coswoods yet. Okay, so I think I'll mention that in the next slide or two slides if I get to it. So we'll come back to that. But here, I think there's nothing for us to do yet right now. I'm just reporting out that's what I saw on the thread. So next slide. Unless I see anybody in queue. Okay.
No, Hans just agreed on your conclusion.
So
yeah,
coming now, drilling down to this Coswood stuff. Okay. So what we need in Teep is we need a version independent ID, and by version independent, I mean, you know, as you rev your suit manifest with, you know, patches and so on, you're going to increase your manifest sequence number, you're going to increase your component ID sequence, you know, version number, and so on. But version independent identifier that we can use in messages and abstract APIs like request TA, what appears in your delete message, and so on. Well, the suit manifest has a digest ID, but that one's version specific. Brendan may be correcting me here. And it says that Coswood is optional. The Coswood spec has this tag ID that says it's a 16-byte uniquely referencing a software component. So to my unknowledgeable eyes, that tag ID looks like it would meet the requirement. But it's optional in suit, and so one thing we could do is to say suit manifests carried in Teep for this purposes need to use the Coswood. But this is the other one that I needed Brendan here, and so Brendan, please correct what any misunderstandings I have.
From previous discussions was that we were planning to use the component identifier in the suit manifest for this kind of purpose.
So,
or at least
I
some
think
portion of it.
if you have something, that's great. I think when I had asked about a component identifier in some message, maybe, I don't remember which message it was, I didn't see anything in the suit manifest document right now that was directly usable other than CosWiz. So please correct me if there is something that's version independent ID.
So what you have in suit for purposes like this is the component identifier. And the way that it works is it's an array of byte strings so that you can represent a notional path. So when we talked about trusted domains previously, the idea was that we were going to have a TEE identifier followed by a trusted domain identifier followed by a vendor identifier, or maybe I've got those two in the wrong order. Not important. And then followed by some kind of TA identifier. So it seems to me like that's probably the same use case as we're describing here.
Okay, so if you think that that's what we should be using, then I'm happy to generate a pull request that points to things, as long as you tell me what the right term to use is, and we can do that offline. Then that sounds fine to me.
That would be my inclination. If there's a good reason not to take that approach, we talked about using UUIDs for TAs as well, so I'm not entirely sure whether you're looking for a UUID here or not.
Just has to be unique, right? Because in the component ID, you're saying the last component of the UUID array could be a UUID, right? It's just arbitrary,
for example.
It could be a UUID.
Yeah. Okay.
I think, that your proposal sounds fine to me, unless anybody else has anything. I see Hannah's gotten queue.
This totally makes sense to me. I was just wondering, maybe you can explain what the idea with the cost suite would be here. I'm not too familiar with, or not enough familiar with cost suite to say like whether this would, how this actually relates.
It's just something that can uniquely identify a software component, right? Meaning the tag ID is something that's just 16 byte that's already an existing thing that's neither RATS nor suit nor Teep specific, right? It's from SACM. It's not an RFC yet. It's an active draft, right?
Okay, but if we, for example, as Brenton said, if we put use the component ID from the suit manifest and put use that, and maybe that contains a UID in our case, that we can mandate that, that should be fine.
Yeah, I agree. Then we should be fine.
Good.
Okay. I think I may have time for one more slide. If I got 2 minutes, we'll see. So let's go one more slide and cut me off in 2 minutes.
Okay.
Okay. So this one was an issue that's been going back and forth between Hannes and me, and I forget who else might have commented on that thing, but it's been on the issue, not on the list. So this is to raise visibility here and to get more inputs here, not necessarily in the next 2 minutes, but at least to tell you to things. And so here we have suit manifests that can depend on other suit manifests. The things it depends on might be even having to come from a different TAM, right? There was a case that we talked about in the context of the architecture document where you have personalization data that might need to come from a different TAM than the TA binary. That's one of the use cases we talked about, last year sometime. And so let's assume that you have a dependency from suit manifest A onto suit manifest B that has to come from a different TAM, right? There's a special case where it can be the same TAM, and that's the one where we started off, Hannes and I discussing. But this is just a generalized saying we actually have the same problem when there's two different TAMs involved. A depends on B. So there's at least 4 options here, and maybe different people have different preferences here. And it's also possible there are going to be multiple correct answers. And so option number 1 is to say, well, the TAM has to resolve all the dependencies, and then pushes down the blob of all the suit manifests down to the agent in one install message. Well, that's problematic if there's a case, I think anyway, if the dependency is personalization data that the TAM is not allowed to see. It just sounds pretty complex, but maybe you can find a way to make it work. Number 2 is the same thing as number 1, except for now there's a separate install message, right? There's an install message that might have a dependency on something that comes in another install message. Option number 3 is to say that the agent suit processor is responsible for resolving the dependency. So the TAM doesn't have to do anything. It's the job of the agent or the suit processor. And now how does that relate to install messages? Well, you could just not respond to the first install message until all the dependencies are resolved and soup processing completes, but maybe that'll take a bunch of time. So what does the TAM do in the meantime? And option number 4 is the agent resolves those dependencies, but sends back some progress notification to the TAM. Maybe there's other options, but those are the 4, and I think I am out of time now. And so my preference would be 3, but I'm going to cede time, so.
Okay. If it's worthwhile, you can take it to the list.
I would love to hear comments from other people in the working group besides me and Hannes. So yes, please comment on the list, but let's go to Akira.
Yeah. Okay, Akira.
Hi. Is my mic working now?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Perfect.
Yes. Yes. Next slide, please. Yes. I'm going to talk something first, which is not written in the slide. So what really happened during the hackathon week? Initially, my plan was there was many update for the 04 draft in the Teep protocol. So catch up with the latest draft on Monday and Tuesday, and then announcing about Wednesday when we all get together with do the connecting individual TAM and TAM server, TAM server and Teep device. But what really happened was we were busy in internal updating implementation of Teep device to adopt the 04 draft until Thursday night or something. So what really happened was having a discussion meeting on Friday. And that's the photo during the hackathon agenda in this slide. So that's the reality. But we got many things raised, not raised, but to improve the draft. So yeah, that's from the next slide. Next, please. Oh yes, this is the picture from the on Friday. Yes. Next, please. And yes, these are the implementation we at the moment we knew on Friday. So I know that Hannes and Ming, we might also have the implementation, but yes. And next slide, please. And these are the details, but most of the details listed here is overlap about what Dave have presented before. And it's related with most of them is token. And another 2 topics was how to consideration of the token, and the second is the detail Teep protocol message compatibility. And detail compatibility is something we could improve with GitHub issue and pull requests and merging it. However, the discussion of the token was a bit more serious. And from the hackathon implementing perspective of the token discussion is is it token need to be mandatory or option? But most importantly, from the implementing on the Teep device and TAM is how to generate the token which will not likely to collide between the different TAM. So everything, I think we need some guidance in the draft, how to generate the token. And then another thing is in the implementation of the Teep install, which is just sending the binary from TAM server to the device, we need some kind of ID. And so right now the TA name changed to TC, so TC unique ID. And if we not explicitly written in the draft, we might end up somebody in the implementer using token for the TC ID, unique ID, which is not a good practice. So I think we were discussing what is the unique ID really going to be used, and And on the Friday is TC ID. What going to be a TC unique ID is something we need. It's not. We not really don't have it right now, but probably it's going to be a TC list or in this suit manifest. So, and another discussion was, right now we were all busy just supporting CBOR and keep CBOR representation for the binary was keep the updating, where we were just following the update was end up the our work, but in the next step will be supporting Kose, and then we really need which cipher suit we need to implement for the at least for the hackathon or interoperability test between the TAM server and Teep device, and that's something I saw the discussion in the Dave's slot. So I see. Okay, and next page, please. Yes. Yeah, these are almost related to the token or Teep message details of the binary format or notation representation. And one thing improvement is we didn't have a time, but we now have the unneeded TA list, so we could use that for the removing the binary inside the Teep device. Yes. And next page, please.
So, Kira, you have 3 minutes left.
Mm-hmm. And yes, this is the pull request still which is open, which is yes, making the TC list as a mandatory, which is not that significant in the changes in the draft, but it's needed to update. Okay, and the next page, please. And these are some of the changes we were able to close during the week at the hackathon. Most of them are just binary format compatibility. Yes. Okay. And next page, please. Mm-hmm. Yes. So this is what we learned. So mostly, it's going to repeat the same thing. Token consideration, and also the ID consideration, and the binary compatibility consideration. And binary compatibility representation is going to be probably okay with the just keep updating with the Git issue and pull request and GitHub. Mm-hmm. And I think that's all. The next page, please. Yes, and these are the people who was in the hackathon. Okay. Any question? I think it's about 1 minute left or something.
Yeah, Dave's in the queue.
So, Kara, there was one thing, and I don't remember which issue, if you can point people to it. It was the one where we had the discussion about the integer field with the and being able to combine stuff into the star int and stuff. Which issue number was that? Remember?
That issue number is 78.
Okay,
I
so
think
that was
yes.
when discussing token. If we make the token optional for that discussion, see issue number 78. It sounds like. Okay, thanks.
I think it's in the slide number page 6. Yes. So we have to change the Teep message framework from the beginning to making which member entry going to be option and which entry is going to be mandatory and option. Yes.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm glad you guys were doing this because you're shaking out some of the issues. both on the document and the flow, which is good. With that, we're out of time. So Dave, do you want me to put out a doodle poll for a virtual progress on the protocol?
Yeah, I think there is still more stuff to discuss that I didn't present. Meaning, and I only picked a subset of issues that I thought were the bigger architectural issues of the protocol. So I'm sure we have at least another hour of discussion. So I was asking, is there any, like, use the canceled rat slot for a side meeting, or schedule a virtual interim afterwards, anything like that? So yeah, please, whatever we can do.
Well, since everyone's on the call and Ben, our AD, is here. Ben, I just sent the cancellation. I did notify the Secretariat. RATS was scheduled to meet tomorrow in the third session, the 4 to 6 p.m. Bangkok time, ICT time. Can we use that slot? Are we too late as an interim or side meeting?
I mean, I think if you want to just have a bunch of people get together and have a side meeting in that slot, that would be great. I don't really expect us to be able to sort of turn it into an official second session or something like that.
No, I don't know that we need to. I mean, and I don't want to lose the momentum. So we'll, are folks okay having should we call it a side meeting then?
Yeah, a side meeting or a working session or something.
Yeah.
I think we would have to use WebEx to answer Dave's question.
Okay. Well, I can set one up. Russ, you were saying something?
I was just going to say the Medico is gone.
My bad. Okay, so I guess I will try and do a quick show of hands. If there's enough interest in participating, let me pose the question. Will you be able to participate in a Thursday 4 p.m. ICT side meeting? Okay, so if you click on the graph icon on the top left, I have a question, and raise your hand if you are able to participate in the side meeting. If you can't, then you can select do not raise your hand. Okay, out of 29 participants, we only have half responding. I will count to 5 and then I will end the question. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so 9 people can participate. That's probably enough, Dave. So I can set up a WebEx. Fall on the sword here. 1 to 3 a.m.
Yeah, that sounds good. WebEx side meeting with 9 people is a good set, so thanks.
Yeah. Okay. I'll set that up. Great. And I apologize for running us late. I think we are done for today. Thank you all for participating.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Didu, if you're still on, he dropped. Darn. Okay. Bye.